Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today's case I'm going to be talking about is actually another suggested case. So I'd like to thank you for that. And it's on the murder of John Price by the notorious Australian killer Katherine Mary Knight. Now when I looked into this case I did find it really disturbing, and as you go through it you will find out why. Not only that, Katherine was actually the first Australian woman to be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So basically, she will never ever get out of jail. She'll be in there for literally the rest of her life, and you will find out why. I'm going to warn you guys that this case I found pretty gruesome and very disgusting. So if that's not something that you would like to be looking into, then this possibly isn't the video for you. I'd just like to give my normal disclaimer. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've gathered the information off the internet and compiled it in one video for educational purposes. John Charles Price was born on the 4th of April in 1955. He was the father of 3 children when he had an affair with Katherine. He was really well liked by everyone that knew him and was previously married, but it actually ended in 1988. His youngest daughter stayed with her mother, while his 2 older children stayed with him. And John was all too aware of Katherine's violent nature when she moved in with him in 1995. Everything did seem to be going really well at first. His kids liked her, and apart from a few violent arguments, their life together was pretty good. So before I get into John's murder, I'd like to bring you guys back into Katherine's past and her previous relationship so you can really relate and get an understanding of Katherine. She was raised in a dysfunctional family environment. Her parents were Barbara and Ken. Barbara had actually had 4 sons with her previous partner Jack, but they actually split up when she had an affair with Ken, and the pair did eventually move away together. Barbara and Ken went on to have 4 more children, and this was when Katherine was born. She was the younger of non-identical twins. So Ken, Katherine's father, was an alcoholic, and he was quite violent towards his wife. He would rape her sometimes up to 10 times a day. And this would basically lead to her hating all men and sex altogether. She would often tell this to her children, and Katherine later would complain to her mother about one of her partners wanting to take place in a sex act that she didn't actually want to do. And her response to this was to stop complaining and basically put up with it. Katherine also claimed that she was sexually assaulted by family members up until the age of 11. When she attended school, she was described as a bully and a loner, and basically she would love standing over younger children and trying to intimidate them. She even attacked one boy with a weapon. So she kind of had these fits of rage, it would seem, but on the other hand, she would be described by teachers as a model student and would often receive rewards for good behaviour. And that's a huge contrast. One minute she's attacking students and the next she's receiving rewards and praise for being such a good student. At the age of 15, she left school to get her dream job in an abattoir. Not long after that, she was promoted and was given her own sets of knives, which she would hang above her bed, basically in case she ever needed them. She would have a few relationships, the first of which was with David Kellett. And I even found that Katherine's own mother had actually warned David. She basically told him to be careful with her daughter, don't ever have an affair with somebody else because she would kill you. And she described her as having a screw loose. They did eventually get married, and on their wedding night, Katherine tried to strangle him. The reason she gave for this? He actually fell asleep after only having sexual intercourse with her 3 times, and she basically wanted more, so she wasn't happy. She tried to strangle him. Luckily, David woke up and he managed to fight Katherine off. Even though she attempted to kill him just 1 day into their marriage, it actually did last for more than 10 years. The marriage was, however, far from perfect. She would do things like hit him over the head with a pan because he came home late, and she actually did fracture his skull. Now, by all accounts, David did actually cheat on her and was often unfaithful. So maybe that's why she hit him with the pan, because she thought he was out cheating on her. Not that that excuses it by any means. They did go on to have a daughter together called Melissa Ann. And shortly after this, in May 1976, David actually left her for another woman. He said he was unable to cope with her abuse anymore. Seriously guys, this case is so upsetting. She was just such a disturbed woman. When her daughter was only 2 months old, she actually put her on a train track, and the train was due to arrive shortly. She then went on to steal an axe and threatened several people in town with it. A man known as Old Ted thankfully found Melissa on the tracks and apparently saved her in the nick of time just before the train was due to arrive. She was of course arrested and taken to hospital, where she recovered and got out the next day. A few days later, she slashed a woman's face and made her drive her to Queensland to basically go and find David. Luckily, this woman did manage to escape. When the police arrived, she'd taken a young boy hostage with a knife. The police actually managed to get the knife away from her using brooms. She was arrested and taken to Morisset Psychiatric Hospital. She was also diagnosed with postnatal depression and spent several weeks recovering from this. And this can cause you to do some pretty crazy stuff, but as you will find out throughout this case, Katherine was a very disturbed woman anyway. Now, when David found out about all of this, he left his girlfriend and basically moved with his mother to support Katherine. He certainly was a brave man in my eyes. After all the abuse that he'd endured and after all the things that she'd done to him, he went to support her anyway. She was released into her mother-in-law and David's care on the 6th of March 1980, and they actually went on to have another child together, Natasha Marie, and just 4 years later, she left David. In 1986, Katherine met David Saunders. After a few months, he moved in with her, and she would often throw him out because she was basically jealous of what he did when she wasn't there. And when he moved back into his apartment, she went over and begged him to come back after she was the one that threw him out in the first place. In May 1987, she gave him an example of what would happen to him if he ever cheated on her. And this is horrendous. She went and took his 2-month-old dingo puppy and slit its throat right in front of him. She then smacked him with a pan and knocked him out. That poor innocent puppy. It really does break my heart to hear stories like that. It did nothing wrong, but it was simply dragged into her horrors. In June 1988, she had her 3rd daughter, Sarah, and they would then go on to buy a house together. Now, how she went on to decorate this house was rather unsettling. She covered the entirety of the walls, including the ceiling, with items such as animal traps, animal skins, animal skulls, as well as things like machetes and pitchforks. And she didn't leave any gap uncovered, any wall uncovered. She basically just covered the entire thing and made her home into one big weapon in a sense. The couple would later have an argument, and this led to him being hit by an iron and stabbed in the stomach with a pair of scissors. Pretty much after this, he went into hiding, and I really don't blame him. Katherine did try and find him by all accounts. He did manage to come out of hiding and see his daughter several months later, and that's when he found out that Katherine had actually gone to the police and told them that she was afraid of him. The cheek of this woman. She was the abuser and she was pretending to be the victim. In 1990, she got pregnant with a man called John Chillingworth and went on to have her son, who was called Eric. Eventually, 3 years later, Katherine left him for John Price, with whom she was having an affair with. As I said before, when the pair's relationship began, there weren't many issues, but this really did escalate. She did things when in 1998 he refused to marry her. She basically got him fired from his job where he'd worked for 17 years. He, of course, kicked her out, but after a few months he would then get back with her. But he wouldn't actually allow her to move in with him, and things just seemed to get worse from there. They fought like cat and dog, and even John's friends didn't really want anything to do with John whilst he was with her, whilst he was in such a toxic relationship. 2 years later, in February 2000, Katherine actually stabbed John in the chest. And this was kind of the end result of a series of assaults. Everyone around town knew about Katherine and her abusive ways. Finally, on the 29th of February, John had had enough and filed for a restraining order. That afternoon, whilst in work, he told his co-workers that basically if he didn't come to work in the morning, it was because she had killed him. And they told him not to go home. But he was so terrified for the lives of his 2 children that he feared if he didn't return home, she would just kill them. So obviously he felt like he had to go back. He had to protect his children. When he got home, he found that Katherine wasn't actually there and she had sent the children out on a sleepover to a different house. He went round to check in with his neighbours like he did so often, spent some of the afternoon with them, and eventually he went to bed at 11 o'clock. Katherine came round to John's house while he was sleeping. She watched telly, she had a shower, before she woke him up and they actually had sexual intercourse before he fell asleep again. The next morning at 6 a.m, John's neighbours came out to find that his car was still in the driveway. Now this was super unusual. John was always out earlier than everyone. Whenever the neighbours came out, the car was never ever there because he'd already left for work. He was due in work that day, so it should have basically not been there. And when he didn't turn up for work, his boss got worried and sent one of his workers to come and check on him. The worker, paired with his neighbour, went round to the house. They knocked on his window to try and wake him, but obviously nothing stirred. They went round to the front door and that's when they found blood. This is when they called the police and the police came at 8 a.m. They broke down the door and found a human pelt hanging up in the living room from a meat hook. The pelt didn't have a head. They also found Katherine, who was completely knocked out due to the sheer amount of pills that she'd taken. Katherine had stabbed John with a butcher's knife whilst he was sleeping, and according to the blood evidence, he actually managed to get up and try and escape. So he actually did manage to run through the house. I say run, I don't know whether he was able to run after suffering the wounds, but he actually managed to get outside, and it was then believed that he either fell back in due to his blood loss, or Katherine actually dragged him back in the house, and it was there that he bled out and lost his life. Katherine had actually stabbed the front and the back of John's body a massive 37 times, and many of these actually did pierce vital organs. Like I said, the police did find a human pelt. Well, after a few hours, Katherine, she basically made John into this pelt, and she hung the skin up in the living room before actually decapitating him. Now, as bad as that is and as horrific that is, what comes next and what her intentions were after this are just disgusting and so disturbing. She was just a really, really sick woman. She put his head in the pot with some vegetables and then decided to cut up pieces of him and cook them into a meal with potatoes, vegetables, gravy, that sort of thing. She then went and set the table basically for his 2 daughters, and she put a note next to the plates with the girls' names on. And in horror, the police believe that she was actually going to serve them the meal in which she had cooked their own father in. And it's just vile and sickening to even think about that. It is also believed that she did make a dish for herself. The half-discarded contents of it were later found outside, so it's thought that she couldn't actually finish it. She then lay down next to the headless, mutilated corpse of John Price, took a large number of pills, and then passed out. The police took her in, and when she finally awoke, she basically claimed that she had no memory of the night that John died, but she was very quickly charged with his murder. She was well known for her aggressive and violent tendencies, and I think basically everyone knew that she'd done it. In October 2001, her trial commenced but didn't really get very far. We're not really sure of the reasons, but Katherine did change her plea from not guilty to guilty, and the judge adjourned the case without testimony. She was escorted to prison that day, and the judge actually marked her papers never to be released. For the first time in history, a woman in Australia was given a life sentence without parole. To this day, Katherine Knight maintains her innocence and basically refuses to accept responsibility for her actions. Katherine Knight has appealed her sentence before and was denied almost immediately. She is still serving her life sentence at Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre. Obviously, it was such a gruesome and disturbing case, and it was just vile. She was such a sick woman. And like I said, you would find out why she will never be released, and she shouldn't, ever, ever. I do find it very important to spread cases like these. Generally, abusive relationships reported are mainly men, and obviously that's not always the case. Women are equally as abusive as men in some cases, and this case just proves it. I mean, she was sick beyond belief. Actually feeding his children with the father's own body is disgusting. So again, let me know what you guys think. Please let me know if you do have any other cases that you would like me to look into. Like I said, this was a suggested case, and I thank you for that suggestion. Anyway guys, that's all I have on the gruesome murder of John Price. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.